the way that Trevor Williams and Anthony Gunter on Team Kawasaki's can move up through the field. Right,
Bike number 4 taught me some valuable lessons. Firstly, just because a motorcycle was ridden by a factory rider at an international supercross does not mean it's automatically a good purchase. Secondly, if your mates start openly mocking your new bike purchase within the first week of ownership, that's usually not a great sign either. And thirdly, if you walk into a dealership looking for piston rings and walk out having bought another motorcycle entirely, you may have a problem. And finally, if you're ever involved in a fully loaded car and trailer doing a complete 360-degree spin on a muddy road, make sure your friends are the loyal type. Mine weren't. But we'll get to that shortly. By this time, I'd sold the mighty RM250Z to, of all people, David. Yes, the same David who'd spent months reminding me how much better the RM was than just about everything else on two wheels. Not exactly sure why I sold it. Maybe I needed the money. Maybe I just wanted something different. Or maybe I was suffering from a condition that would plague me for the rest of my life. Motorcycle restlessness. You know the disease. You finally get the bike you wanted, then you spend the next 6 months looking at other bikes.
Team Honda, hotly pursued by young Western Australian superstar Jeff Leisk on bike.
And besides, the grass is always green on the other side of the fence, and in this case the green wasn't grass. It was a 1982 KX250 B1. Just why on earth I bought this bike still baffles me even today. I asked some friends while researching this video and they didn't know either. Now this particular KX did at least have an interesting backstory. It was one of 2 bikes our local Kawasaki Suzuki dealer had purchased after the Melbourne International Supercross way back in 1982, and that was a huge event. Team Kawasaki riders Trevor Williams rode one, and Anthony Gunter rode the other one. I hope I got that pronunciation right. Which one I ended up with, I have no idea. David's hero, the legendary Chuck Sun from the USA, took the win that night aboard a near-stock standard 1982 Honda CR250R. How do we know that? Because he told us.
Tell me a little bit about this motorcycle, and let's start with the suspension.
Well, really important, we'll start with the front end. We've got 12 inches of suspension up there, and it's not only the length of the travel, it's how...
Yes, we were actually there that night to cheer on a couple of local riders, one of them who we shall call Billy, because that's his name. You may remember Bill from previous Rider Tales, as he had the private motocross track which his family provided as a legal and safe place for local riders to ride and train for free.
And then a fairly large gap back once again to Trevor Williams on bike number 6.
Billy drew a very tough heat race that night, which not only included a host of national riders, but also the legendary Marty Smith from the USA. And after a few crashes, he still almost made the cut for the main event. Very good effort. Now, back then, most riders outside the sponsored National Riders Group had never even seen a supercross track, let alone ridden one. And that night proved to be an absolute carnage of crashes and top-name riders trying desperately to cope with the challenging track. Many big names were nowhere to be seen. Just after the main event had finished, David managed to corner Chuck Sun himself, fresh from victory, shirtless, covered in sweat, and somehow still willing to stand there talking motorcycles with a teenage kid for what felt like forever. Chuck was an absolute gentleman. Now, whether seeing that Kawasaki race that night had anything at all to do with me buying one later, I honestly don't know. But I did. Buy one, that is.
fantastic motor racing. Further back to third place, and it's a great battle between Robert Beadle.
And that brings us to the KX itself. While nearly everybody else had moved to water cooling, Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, probably a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head, Kawasaki apparently decided there was still life left in the Stone Age. This thing was air-cooled, very air-cooled. Sure, it had unitrack rear suspension, that sort of worked okay. Sure, it had a front disc brake, the first production motocrosser to have one actually. Not that it needed one. The engine was so slow you could practically stop it Fred Flintstone style with a decent pair of thongs. Now, if memory serves me correctly, I think I paid about $1,000 for it, which, looking back, was probably fair, because it definitely wasn't worth $2,000. I didn't race this bike. There was no point. On any track with a start straight longer than an average armchair, it just wasn't going to cut it. I wouldn't keep this bike all that long, but to be fair, it wasn't completely hopeless. The bike actually had a decent bottom end power that is, maybe even better than the RM250Z. On a tight track, it could hold its own for about 10 minutes. Then the engine would get hot. Then the piston to cylinder clearance would open up. The compression would disappear, and so with it went the horsepower. From that point on, the poor thing rattled like a tin full of marbles. The harder you rode it, the slower it seemed to go. Meanwhile, David never missed an opportunity to remind me. Every single time I tried defending the Kawasaki, every single time I attempted to explain one of its few redeeming features, he would simply make a downward hand gesture, a steep downward hand gesture, representing the power curve. That was it. Conversation over. Because he was right. And I knew he was right, 100% right in fact. That thing reached its peak power so quickly, but then fell off the pipe faster than you could sneeze. On our secret practice track, I swear even the kookaburras were laughing at me. Looking back though, the most exciting thing that happened during my ownership of the KX didn't actually happen on the motorcycle. It happened on the way to the track. It had been raining heavily. The sort of rain that turns dirt roads into skating rinks. Which wasn't really a problem because our secret practice track was mostly sand. And by now, of course, sand was my friend. Unfortunately, one of the access roads wasn't. I was driving my old 1973 Ford XA Falcon, my very first car in fact. Behind us was a trailer carrying David's RM250, my KX250 and our schoolmate Michael B's beautiful RM125X. Now, we'd driven this road dozens of times, but never in conditions like this. And then it happened. The car started sliding. Not violently, not dramatically, just drifting. At about 40 kilometres an hour. 25 miles per hour for my American friends. I tried accelerating. Nothing. Counter steering. Nothing. Braking. Again, nothing. By now, the trailer had jackknifed. The whole combination was rotating sideways. And there was absolutely nothing I could do. We were merely spectators, passengers in the world's slowest car crash. We were totally at the mercy of the road camber, the slippery clay, and our forward momentum. I said to David and Michael, "There's nothing I can do." David, however, seemed remarkably relaxed. I'm sure he actually thought this was fun. After all, it wasn't his car. I, on the other hand, was already calculating the repair bill in my head. Then I chanced to look back at Michael B in the back seat. Michael, it seems, had launched himself across the back seat, frantically lunged for his matching bright yellow helmet and slammed it over his head. Self-preservation first. His hands firmly grasping the sides, he then adopted the crash position in preparation for the worst. And it was at this point that David and I completely lost it. The sight was simply too much. We were crying with laughter. The car and trailer continued its slow 360-degree dance with the road. Then something strange happened. Despite spinning, we were still travelling in exactly the right direction. The car rotated. The trailer rotated. At one point, the trailer was practically leading the convoy. We completed a full 360-degree turn. Then, suddenly, the tyres found grip. The trailer straightened. And apart from a tiny dent in the bumper bar, nothing was damaged. The only real casualty was Michael's dignity, which we happily attacked for many years afterwards, as you do. Now, back to the KX. Eventually, after many months of motocross practice and bush bashing, it was finally due for a new set of piston rings. So off I trotted to our local Kawasaki and Suzuki dealer. No, not the dodgy dealer from previous videos. He was long gone in history by that stage, thank you. So I trotted off to our local Kawasaki and Suzuki dealer to buy some, which, as you will find out shortly, the most expensive piston rings in history. As were common back then, the local dealer didn't have the parts in stock. "They're on back order, mate," became the story I would hear on my frequent visits over the coming weeks. I was becoming increasingly desperate. No new rings meant no riding and no fun with my friends. This saga had dragged on way too long. I was at the point where I just about decided to sell it when I visited the dealer just one more time. And there it was. The beautiful, gleaming, green and gold, all new for 1983, water-cooled Kawasaki KX250 C1. Kawasaki had arrived late to the water-cooling part, but they had definitely arrived. Of course, I had to have it. David, of course, agreed. As he would.
Marty Moat still in hot pursuit. Chuck Sun starting to close on Marty Moat's in third place, and Beagle Bailey scratched.
The B1 was traded, and the C1 became the latest resident of my open-fronted shed beside the main road. You know the one. And that's where the story of bike number 4 ends and bike number 5 begins. Alright guys, keep those comments coming. They've been absolutely fantastic, and I think some of your stories are actually stranger than mine. So yeah, very good. See you next time. Mike from Moto Touro.
Jeffrey Leisk makes another challenge, a final challenge there on the last corner. 3 or 4 jumps to go as Chuck Sun comes along. It looks like Jeff Leisk stalled almost. Marty Moats is third. So Jeff Leisk back to third on the last 500 yards for leading it. How's that for a fireworks display at the end